welcome everyone to the American Labor Museum and to a special event we have today on May 15th at 1 p.m. 2021. And we're very happy to have with us today for a conversation and some Q&A filmmaker Mark Street, who created the film Work Songs in 2019. So thank you so much for being here, Mark. And if I may, just by way of introduction, the American Labor Museum, the Botto House National Landmark, which is its headquarters where I am located, is in Haledon, New Jersey at 83 Norwood Street, and it was the meeting place for over 20,000 silk mill workers during the 1913 Patterson Silk Strike. The museum today offers a free lending library, restored period rooms, changing exhibits, museum store, old world gardens, educational programs, and special events. Anyone is welcome to visit our website, www.labormuseum.net, for further information. And for May, which is Labor History Month, and we're very appreciative to Mark and his production staff and company that we will be able to extend viewing of his film Work Songs through the end of May. The film has been available complimentary through the museum's website from May 1st through the 14th, but that will be extended through the end of the month. So we encourage you to view. The tickets are limited, first come, first serve. So again, visit www.labormuseum.net to claim your free ticket. In this film, Work Songs, very briefly, through interviews and observational footage, various workers, contemporary workers, speak and explore how they find meaning in their jobs. And the film is inspired by the work of the great Studs Terkel. Filmmaker Mark Street, among his many film accolades and achievements, is currently an assistant professor of film at Fordham University Lincoln Center. This program, viewing the film, and this interview and conversation today is made possible in part by a grant administered by the Passaic County Cultural and Heritage Council from funds granted by the New Jersey State Council on the Arts. So thank you for bearing with me through this introduction. We are here, after all, to talk with and speak with Mark Street here. So I'd like to open it up to you, Mark, by asking broadly, what was the goal? What was your goal with this film, Work Songs? And maybe you can speak to, as the film closes and ends, there is a beautiful dedication of the film to Jack D. Street, comma, worker. And if maybe you could give us a little insight into your dedication as well.
Certainly,
Mark.
yeah. As usual, when I'm making films, I don't really know what I'm doing as I'm doing it. It's sort of the antithesis of, let's say, a Ken Burns film, which has a lot of money and a thesis and a well thought out rhetorical strategy. This was more cumulative, and I think Studs Terkel, is a great hero in that way. And I sort of thought about it. What if these vignettes sort of coalesced and became cumulative, right? What if I started interviewing people and sort of saying, okay, well, let's see, I have some interviews with people surrounding the automatic vehicle milieu in Pittsburgh, which I found very interesting as a place to start, this kind of unholy alliance between Carnegie Mellon, the city of Pittsburgh, and Uber in order to transform a Rust Belt city into a green city, sort of at the expense of taxi drivers and other workers and things like that. So that's where I started. And then I said, well, that's interesting. What about some geographical diversity? What about some gender diversity? What about some the diversity in terms of blue collar and white collar labor and things like that? So I sort of just did everything from planned interviews, went out to San Pedro, California, and interviewed some dock workers out there, very planned interviews, to um, sort of looking around at the crossing guard in my neighborhood in Brooklyn and sort of saying, this woman just loves her job. And, my wife and I ran into her at a concert once, and she just controlled that corner and just loved what she did. And I thought, can I interview you? Or asked her, and she said yes. There's a bartender in the film, and I had stopped for a whiskey at a beautiful bar in Times Square called Jack's Corner. It's a boxing bar. And there's a woman behind the bar, and I thought, boy, she has a whole life beyond this, what she's doing right here. And certainly she did. She was a voice actress. So what's the concept of a day job? What's the concept of something you do for money and your passion is elsewhere? So I just sort of built the film like that. And once I felt like I had enough through line, enough themes that coalesced around the idea of automation, frankly, the decline of the union, people who had been, excluded from the protection of the union and things like that, I felt like I had a film. It could have gone on and on. It could have been more episodic even, but I just kept moving around, and it was important to have geographic diversity in it as well. I love road films, so I saw it as sort of a road film. Let me go here, let me go there, let me get the mix of planned interviews and spontaneous interviews right. Hey, can I grab you on the street? Can I ask you 4 questions? Versus sitting down with a labor historian and things like that. So that was more or less it. In terms of my father, he's a lifelong worker, a child of the Depression. I just heard a story. He taught at Beloit College here in Wisconsin for 50 years, and he said he started his academic career by walking into the dean's office at a community college in Alabama and saying, I would like to attend this college and I don't have any money. And the secretary said, if you're willing to work, I'll figure this out for you. So he swept floors and worked his way through this community college, and then went to the University of Alabama and got his PhD and all that. So anyway, work has been his driving force his whole life. And I wanted to honor that.
Mark, I do have a question as well regarding beyond the interview, actually going into the workplace. How did you happen to manage that? I was really impressed with that.
Well, it's tough. I couldn't get on the docks in San Pedro, alas. That would have been lovely. But union rules, safety rules, things like that made that impossible. There's a factory in North Carolina that a friend of a friend owns, and he said, have at it. Come, record as you will. I recorded in the Los Angeles farmers market, which is a beautiful spot, until they kicked me out. And I think one of the things about not knowing what one is doing as a filmmaker, or I should say, having either no crew or a very skeleton crew, is that you can travel, I was going to say incognito, but I mean closer to the ground, under the radar. And in one way, people don't value you as much if you don't have a large crew and you don't have a PBS grant. But another way, you can just really approach people and have these sort of one-on-one conversations. And again, back to Studs, that was his thing, that kind of personability. And, I think in the film, you see a kind of puckish character describing myself who is approaching these people and sort of saying, hey, tell me about your job. It doesn't always work, but when it does work, it can be very interesting. And I noticed that, and I don't know what your experience is, but near the beginning of the film, I over prepared, and near the end of the film, I just come in with no notebook and talk to the person and listen. right? And I think a lot of the film is about listening, and I hope that's borne out in the title, and I hope that the audience gets that. I'm an academic, I guess, and there's whole communications departments, and there's whole classes on speech, but there aren't a whole lot of classes on listening, are there?
True. Yeah.
So I felt that's what I learned in this film. Listen, shut the hell up. Don't lead people into something. Allow yourself to be surprised by them, even if it's contrary to your sensibility. Let them talk, let them tell their stories. There's a woman in the film who literally rents out every aspect of her life, her bedroom to Airbnb. She makes mugs from Etsy, and she's just she's gigging. She's part of the gig economy all the time, but she she wasn't as negative about it as I was, So I let her have her say. And and then she told this wonderful story about a Airbnb guest asking to be tucked in in her bed. So it's this weird connection of this weird combination of disconnect, renting out your own bedroom, and then having someone ask for this very human, almost
Yes.
boundary boundary crossing gesture or something like that. So those are the kind of things that I look for in films. Surprises.
Everybody has a story.
Everybody has a story. You ask somebody about the worst job they've ever had, the weirdest job they've ever had, people can talk for hours.
Yeah.
So I was going to ask then too, and you may have answered it. If you were to shoot the film again, what would you do differently? Maybe you would extend it because your interview style may have changed by the end. But how would you answer? You're going to shoot it again. Would you do anything differently?
That's a very interesting question. I made a film called Oil Towns in 2017 about the itinerant oil workers up in North Dakota, and so that was a 40-minute film that gave me some sort of was the beginning of this film in some ways, and I followed these mainly men who work in the oil rigs up there. They live in man camps, sort of Steinbeckian man camps. They're sending money home. They're working 3 weeks on, 1 week off, and things like that. So I learned a lot from that. If I had to do over again, if I had unlimited resources, I think that the notion of labor is more international than the film makes it seem, right? And I would love to be in the maquiladoras on the border of Mexico and the United States. Now, getting in there, doing that is a whole other thing. But the notion that U.S. labor stops at the border is, of course, outdated. So I think that is either a failing or a blind spot in the film. But at some point, I couldn't figure out quite how to do it, how to get to the international aspect of this, So I would like to investigate those sort of cross currents and national trends, I guess.
That sort of answers a little bit my next question is, when you talked about your earlier film, I wondered how Work Songs fits into your whole body of work so far. It doesn't sound like it's a departure. It sounds like it's a theme that you visited previously.
Well, that's a really great question. In a way, it is. It's my most conventional film. I was sort of raised as an experimental filmmaker, looking at work by Stan Brakhage and Carolee Schneemann and Andy Warhol and things like that. And a lot of my films are very abstract and shorter and maybe less popularly interpretable or something, for lack of a better word. But what that world taught me is that you can do whatever you want, right? That there are no rules, that you can you can be the author of a film filmmaker, um, there's not a lot of mediation between yourself and the material. That there doesn't have to be, right? It's not as if I can't tell you the number of coffee dates I have to have with people where they're like, can you talk to me about fundraising? And you know, I'm not pretending that everybody has access um, to production materials at all, but a lot of people do, right? With cell phones and with digital material and with pretty cheap editing equipment. I say this as someone who grew up in the 16 millimeter world, right? Where you really did need infrastructure. And nowadays, you know, you really can shoot, you know, for pretty cheaply, you know. But I don't think I quite answered your question. You started out somewhere else and I went somewhere else. I'm sorry, Evelyn.
That is fine. That is fine. I'm glad. I was thinking too about the artist Ralph Fasanella. When I watched your film, I was struck by the colors, just of course in the flower market and so on. And it's probably sacrilegious, you know, to say this to a filmmaker, but I could turn off the sound and just watch the images, and they're really beautiful. The one image of the worker who explains he has no high school, I think he called it a degree, sitting in a chair outside, that was just such a beautiful still image. And then I could just also just listen to it without the images. I was reading a review of the series The Underground Railroad, which will be available soon, and the sound technicians and crew and how they use sounds of chains and so on to really tell the story of the escaping slaves. Even in workplaces and in your film, I was paying attention to the workplace sounds, which must have presented a challenge in themselves to you in making this film. So I just wanted to throw that out to you and ask if you had any comments or response. It's beautiful artistic work, and I know it must take a lot of skill to be able to put those two together and have them beautiful individually and on their own. Yeah.
Well, I really appreciate your thought about being able to turn off the sound and appreciate it as a visual thing. I always tell my students that you know, that if you want to think about editing and you want to think about color and rhythm, you should be able to look at a Japanese movie and not know Japanese and not read the subtitles and appreciate the arc of the story and how things move and things like that. In terms of sound, Robert Bresson, the great French filmmaker, always argued that sound and image should be working together as a sort of relay, was his word. You know, rather than sound doing exactly what the image does, you want them to sort of be in conversation, in dialectic. You want the audience to be in the middle, sort of negotiating them in some ways. So I've always, for instance, in the professional industry, usually you lock the picture and then you go and you see about sound. And usually there's a lot of music and there's a lot of like, oh, there's a guy on a forklift, let's find some forklift sounds. You know, there's a lot of that sort of filling in the gaps. What I like to do is work on the image a little bit, the sound a little bit, the image a little bit, the sound a little bit, so that there is a back and forth between them. But I did want to mention some other work that is, this is what I meant to say earlier, that is relevant to both Oil Towns and Work Songs. And that is a film I made in 2001 called Happy. And I went around and I interviewed people on the streets of New York and asked them if they were happy. That's it. Are you happy? And that film is a remake of Chris Marker's great film, The Pretty Month of May from 1967, which itself is a remake of Chronicle of a Summer by the anthropological filmmaker Jean Rouch. And they both did the same thing in Paris. They went around and they said, are you happy? And some people would say, yeah, of course I'm happy. I have a job and I'm married. And others said, how can I possibly be happy with the war in Indochina the way it is? And this sort of simple question, existential question led to these expansive, diatribes with students, with older people, with workers, etc. Happy, which I'm happy to share with you. It's on YouTube or Vimeo, but without a password. It's a lot of workers because it's people on the street. and it's a lot of, there's a UPS driver, and of course in New York, as you know, if you approach someone with such a wacky question, people either talk to you for an hour or they curse you, but that's okay. I mean, I felt like it was a and I interviewed someone who had just come from an operation, and I ran into people who had all sorts of stories, all stemming from a very simple question. So I guess when I make films, if there's any connection to other films, the great thing about making films is it gives you an opportunity to ask questions. It gives you a reason to be nosy, right? And same with journalism, right? We all have these questions, we all wonder, but we don't walk up to people in a diner and say, tell me about your worst job experience. But if you have a camera, it gives you license. And I try to adopt a sort of courageous persona where I'm able to do that.
Bravo.
About work songs, can I ask you what was most surprising to you when you made the film?
I was surprised that the woman I described, who is I would say, well, there are two surprises. I would call her a textbook personification or casualty of the gig economy. This person who rents out her house and used to work for a single doctor, and now her job is sort of she works for 5 different doctors, right? And she's paid per document, and she's not paid she's not paid by a single doctor with health benefits. She's paid per document. Not an easy life, right? But the fact that she was so positive about it surprised me. And I wanted the film to reflect that surprise, I guess. What else? I had an incident at my university where I was interacting with someone via email, and I said, okay, we're not getting anywhere. That happens with email, right? We're not getting anywhere. Can I call you? And I looked her up in the directory, and she wasn't there. And I said, oh, well, I can't find your phone number. And she said, well, I've never set foot on campus. I work from home, right? I work completely from home. I don't have any connection to this place where I work, right? So to me, and of course in the pandemic, we've all experienced some of that alienation. But to me, that was an alienated situation in the Marxist sense, right? Alienated. But she was happy working from home. So I'm behind the camera. I was sort of like, well, that's your story. If you feel comfortable working from home and that's the way you derive pleasure from work, you certainly cannot argue with someone's experience, right?
That's true. You can't argue with their experience. I wanted to ask too, because it relates a little bit to the story of the American Labor Museum. At the beginning of the film, you interview a retiree who was a labor union official and labor historian, and he's flipping through a book and talking about the industrial workers of the world. And the IWW organizers were here speaking from the balcony of the museum, the Botto family home, silk mill workers' home, to assist the workers in their radical 8-hour day struggle in 1913. And the language he uses about how the workers refer to one another resonates with this story. That's this story. And it was certainly part of his story, and he is a retiree. So I wondered how you located him and how you might see his attitude towards unions and how he sees workers relating to one another, how you see that in the other workers that you talked to or maybe talked to but weren't in the film.
That's a great question. Al was a real gem of a person, you know, and as is the story of the Wobblies, obviously. And I guess I'll answer in his voice, where he, you know, he says, you know, some of the people coming up today don't have the sense of struggle that we had, and some of them love the. He's got this great line. Some of them love the employer. Oh, God forbid they should love the employer. And, you know, it's this, you know, sort of classic Marxist, which I agree with, idea that the employer is there to make money, and he exists for that purpose. And, you know, he might be a kind person, or the Christmas party might be lavish, but it's a structural antagonism, right? And I think, you know, Art felt that, and didn't feel that in the younger workers. The other one that I think was quite interesting was the UPS worker who spoke, and I don't think this is in the film at all, but he spoke of the days where it was just a more collective spirit among the drivers. He said at the end of the day, we would get together and we would say, oh, it's 5 o'clock. We're at the end of the day. You've got 6 packages. I happen to finish a little bit early. You know, give me 3 of those packages. Can you do that today? No. Everything is on a, you know, tablet. Their routes are monitored. You know, if there's a dog in the way of the truck, that counts against them. He talks about this in the film too. And by the way, Ken Loach's film is an amazing film. Great English filmmaker. Sorry We Missed You, about it's not called UPS, but it's obviously a UPS driver in England who, you know, it's a fiction film, but he, you know, first day he gets there and they give him the tablet. He pays for the tablet, you know. They give him this is terrible, but they give him a bottle to urinate in because there's no time to use the bathroom. You know, everything counts against him. It's a really wonderful film. But anyway, your question was about different attitude towards work. Here's a surprise. This UPS worker, and again, I'm not arguing with his experience, I don't know. He said that UPS was very different when it was a privately owned company, that going public turned it into a much more cutthroat, you know, by the book, profit-driven organization, and the relationship between management and workers deteriorated when it went public. Something I hadn't thought about, right? That there may be a benevolent employer out there, right, who privately owns a company and negotiates with her workers. But once it goes public, it's all market driven and it's all shareholder driven. And it doesn't sound like that's news to you at all at the Labor Museum, but it's something I hadn't thought about at all.
And finally, I was thinking about, because we just had our May Day Festival, we have an annual May Day Festival at the museum, performances of vocal and instrumental folk and labor music. So of course, part of the tract of your film includes a classic labor song. So I had wondered how you decided to include that piece, or which other ones you considered.
Sure. I mean, it's just such a great song. And, you know, I don't generally use a lot of music in my films. I prefer to have ambient sounds be musical rather than use music itself. You know, I thought there are plenty of other pro-union films out there. I'm pro-union, but I didn't want the film to hit you over the head with that, right? And I wanted it to be more about the anecdotes of different people, some of whom are in unions and some of whom aren't. You know, I saw the film itself, work songs, you know, sort of like albums. You all know albums and CDs. I don't know if all of our younger listeners will. But you know, there's a spirit to an album, and there's an arc to it, right? I remember first side, second side, etc., right? And they hold together. They're all a little bit different. Maybe they're a little bit different, but something like you know, Joni Mitchell album or something like that, you know, you get a sense of how it moves over time. So I thought, let me put these vignettes together and have them function as a sort of, let's say, playlist. Let's make it contemporary. And you know, they'll each have their own story unto themselves, but they'll have an aggregate as well. So that was the idea.
It's terrific. It's really a great film, and so so timely these days with the pandemic coming to an end and so many hopefully coming to an end and so many trying to sort themselves out in employment that has disappeared for them, and you know, just major changes in their work life because of the pandemic and otherwise. So it really is a wonderful film, and gives everyone a chance to reflect about those workers in their own community. And as you said, it's good to listen and think about union membership, your vote, and taking care of one another in the community. So Angelica, I don't know if you had anything else to add. I've gone through my list of questions, and
just a note of thanks to you, Mark, and also to the Passaic County Culture and Heritage Council, which actually allowed us to purchase the tickets that are available for the general public through the end of May. And for those who are listening, and if you haven't seen the film, please visit our website to get to see it. And bravo to you. Thank you.
Thank you. It's really a wonderful chat with both of you.
Thank you so much, Mark. Take care.